What kind of cyborg do you want to be? Impossible bodies.
Impossible between humans and machines, and tunes into chances as well as obstacles, both between freedom and constraints.
The word cyborg is something that I had some trouble in 2004 with the UK government, because I had to renew my passport and they said there was a problem with my photo. They said that you cannot appear in your passport photo with electronic devices. I replied to them telling them that I had become a cyborg and that I felt that the antenna was not an electronic device but a new body part.
That the freedom of being able to design your own sensors and your own body parts.
I think that we're at this really important time of the world where we can democratize the next steps of technology. So institutes, museums and galleries, when working with artists, it's like this laboratory where we can test and we can question the future of where we are headed.
Hey guys, I'm CJ from Dada Bots, and I generate death metal with AI.
They were extremely concerned about losing their wealth and an enormous amount of money stored in hundreds of thousands of bats.
Welcome everybody. Welcome audience and welcome Reeps100. What you just saw, what you just saw was a short recap of all the wonderful things that we had together, the artists and performers and musicians during the Impossible Bodies Festival. And if you want to see more, all live events that we streamed are now visible on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, and we have a longer recap as well. This is already the last day of the Impossible Bodies Festival, and we have a wonderful closing event. We really, end with a bang. And so I would love to introduce to you Reeps100. Before I do, I have to tell you that, so we first have a presentation by Reeps100 and his performance, and afterwards there's possibility to for you to, via the chat, to ask him questions. So please bear with us and respond or ask your questions so that we can do a Q&A afterwards. The last thing is for me now to introduce Reeps100. Yeah, I know Reeps100 from having experienced his performance physical, which before the COVID-19. Harry Yeff, aka Reeps100, is a world-renowned vocalist, and as a beatboxing artist, he has been exploring his human voice in all ways thinkable and possible. The most important thing for us now, and he will be talking about that a lot, is his collaboration with an artificial intelligence, and by that doing that, um, finding new areas for his voice to develop. So I'm giving the word to Reeps100 to present his work.
Welcome to Impossible Bodies.
Hello, my name is Harry Yeff. I'm also known as Reeps100. I am part of the E.A.T program at Bell Labs, the Experiments in Art and Technology. I'm also the founder of R100 Studios. R100 Studios, we basically use academia and research as a medium to help the general public experience and engage with complex ideas. And I think we need this type of expertise more than ever at the moment, as we are all very, very aware it's a very challenging time, and a lot of the systems in which we relied on are no longer viable. We have a huge gap and changes in the ways that we flow, our behaviors, our day-to-days. And when you take away all of these structures, you need radical creativity. We really need these new ideas to help us continue moving forward. And I think art and experience and design is totally responsible for this. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here as part of Impossible Bodies, mostly because of the curation and the fact that you can bring incredible minds together, and maybe something I say, maybe things that have happened over the inspiring event contributes to radical creativity, radical new ideas. And I think that is extremely exciting. My work really centers around the human voice, and it's quite a strange subject when you think about the human voice and innovation. It's a huge, huge space, and it's growing every day. But the human voice is still being uncovered. I think the human voice is still augmenting and changing and growing. And when you start to design thematically, experientially around the voice, something very interesting happens where you're able to actually design pieces that connect the social, academic, cultural, scientific spaces with ease. It's something that we all share. It's an absolute human fundamental. And I think it's a really interesting, uncovered, hard to quantify space. What is the maximum potential of the human voice? And I think we can use the human voice as a gateway into a type of empathy which is extremely productive. And the center of my concepts that I'm speaking about today is the idea of augmented relationships. So what does that mean, augmented relationships? We hear buzzwords and terms like this sort of used all the time, but it is inherently ambiguous. But there is a fundamental idea that the fusion of systems, the deviation from a path because the introduction of another system, another tool, another person, we augment. And the human voice is an interesting example because it's ever shifting, ever changing. Accents are a really interesting example of that. You spend long enough in a space, you start to sound different. The social interactions start to seep into you and your voice changes. It's this ever malleable thing. But also, we use the voice to interact with the world around us, but it's also extremely fundamental with defining ourselves. It's a huge part of our identity. The louder we speak, I think the clearer we can have an understanding of ourselves. But what you're finding now is there's an even more interesting space, which is using the voice to actually interface with the world around us. We can use the voice to augment with technology and establish an augmented relationship. But is there maybe a simpler example of an augmented relationship? So one obvious one is assistance. We live in the age of assistance. At home, we're constantly using these tools, and we know that this is going to advance in leaps and bounds, but they're rather rigid. And I feel like some of the lessons in that are not necessarily spoken about in terms of the arts and how the fact we can be assisted and be pushed further is not as simple as advertising and having sort of data collection. There's something much more nuanced when you have assistance, when you start to augment or interact with the tool. We're all extremely familiar with our smart devices, our phones. We are now using them like a new organ, and we are all augmented beings. We live in a sea of augmentation. So another example is actually a case study from me, and it starts with my very first augmented relationship, and that's with chess. I was actually a tournament chess player growing up, and I had a fundamental love and obsession for the game. I had an extremely chaotic environment. I grew up in a very rough part of London, and when I had no structure in my life, I found chess and I fell absolutely in love with it. And something that I realized very quickly is it didn't matter how much I studied at home, it was always actually my opponents. They were the ones that pushed me further. It was that dance, that stressful, ferocious back and forth with an opponent. The fact that they scared me, it made me work harder, it made me grow, and actually gave me more insights than in more ways than I ever could have achieved on my own. And I think that's extremely fascinating. I also had my first interaction with artificial intelligence when it came to working and enjoying chess, because my dad actually got me a very early chess AI growing up, and I had a really profound fondness and relationship with this system. It made me better. It never got bored. It constantly was ready for a new game. I could play hundreds and hundreds of games in ways that human beings just couldn't offer me. And I absolutely loved that. And I remember thinking even then, I wonder what other sort of ways that this can happen. And in gaming, it's extremely established. But opponents can be our greatest collaborator. In many ways, this I see as an interruption. I think opponents, they interrupt us, they stop us in our tracks, they break up our plans, and that massively increases plasticity. We're able to think in new ways and be pushed in a new direction, and I think that leads to a refreshed perspective of what we're doing. And as you actually get better at what you do, as you get stronger, I think it could become a bit of a prison. I think you can end up falling into the trap that because you are good at something, you do it more, and you have more ownership over your patterns and your behaviors. It becomes much harder for you to be told that you're wrong, to hear that you're wrong, to accept that you're wrong. Where actually, if you're in a system of rules and something is playing the game with you by your rules, you can't hide behind that. The idea of being pushed, being challenged, to be interrupted, it really forces you to think in new ways and to kind of really question if what you're doing is working. And I love that idea that our perspective can be shifted in this way. I think we always think about collaboration and harmony, accessibility, but actually being terrified occasionally is extremely good for us. And I think these systems have the ability to understand us, to give us insight into us, and become an interactive second self to actually push back against us. So what's an example of expert interruption in my work? It actually started with this project, which was E.A.T chess, I called it. I stopped playing chess, but many of my friends actually went on to become international masters, grandmasters, and I always marveled at their ability, but they would always say that they had a love-hate relationship with it, that it was almost frustrating the way that they were so good at something, but actually it felt the same sometimes. It felt kind of stale. Their love, their passion wasn't the same as when they were students. So a very simple concept. I designed this board. I changed the rules. It's extremely intense. It's nearly double the pieces. And I had international masters come and play on this board, and their expertise was interrupted. They were frustrated, they were annoyed, they were angry, but all of them walked away with a refreshed perspective. They became students again, and their plasticity was increased. There was a new experience in a game that they played way over 10,000 hours in. And this was the introduction of the concept of expert interruption. So I moved on from smaller projects and applied it to larger projects, and this is the Polyphonic Playground. The Polyphonic Playground is a large wooden structure It's in collaboration with Studio PSK and the Fashion Space Gallery. We showcased it at Milan Design Week and also South by Southwest, and we had the pleasure of introducing some of my favorite musicians to come and work with the structure. So how do musicians work with a wooden playground? Well, actually, each bar is a MIDI trigger. Also on the slide and the swings, there's about 56 triggers in total. And just like the chess players who normally played a certain way, the board was a certain way, they had to jump and reach. They would bring a sample pack of their own sounds, so 56 sounds. They would plug in to the device through USB, and their sounds would be dispersed across the structure. The results were really interesting because, again, they were used to being experts. They're used to standing a certain way, feeling a certain way, a certain tech rider, a certain way of performing. And despite their insane talent, they again were terrified. When you introduce 500 people, you have terrified musicians because they're doing something out of their habit, outside of their expertise, and they had to run and jump and play. But again, the results were extremely interesting, that despite this negative experience, what we actually had was a wholesome reframing of their perspective. They were able to have a new relationship with their expertise. The fear led to a new approach, inspiration, and I do believe inspiration really strikes when you overcome your comforts. It's just over the hill of your habits, just over the hill of your comforts. And we've continued to use this for other mediums. We've had contemporary dancers, poets, sort of landscape, sound designing, all come in and interact with the structure. So it became a format for plasticity, and again, a manifestation of expert interruption. So this work doesn't quite involve voice. And how is the voice an augmented tool? What is an example of that? So I believe that soon we will have 8 billion untapped voices on planet Earth. And what I mean by that is we do not use our voices to their full potential. We actually have a huge challenge where we only use about 20% of our vocal capacity. In using our voices in this way, we need to learn to express and open up more. The more that we use our voices, the more that we're actually able to be in touch with our sense of self. And again, our full spectrum of communication outside of language is extremely important. And this is called paralanguage. All of the social information, all of the tone and the para-meta information that is in between the words you're saying is often overlooked. But actually, when we think about how we connect to one another, it plays a huge role in how we shape that connection. And the voice is always changing, always shifting. And every single human voice is totally unique. I've been very lucky to travel around the world and develop an understanding of how the human voice is developing, learning a ton of new vocal techniques, working with different cultures and spaces and artists and musicians. But one thing that's very obvious across the board is actually, if you can innovate in something as old and profound as the human voice, an absolute human fundamental, it makes you think about other human fundamentals. What are we actually missing? What are we starting to ignore? If we are always thinking about language, yet there's all of this tone, right now you are all psychoacoustically judging me, consciously and unconsciously, based on the way that I'm speaking to you. But there's a very interesting space in terms of meta communication, our body language, how we sound. And it's actually quite scary to think, if we're missing that fundamental, what other fundamentals are we missing? So how can we reveal that? And how does this play into augmented relationships? Well, actually, the project I'm about to show you is a manifestation of all of those concepts smashed together. When I talk about the tones and this meta space of paralanguage, I often think of a video that was released last year of a dreaming octopus. This octopus, using its incredible camouflage capacity, was potentially swimming in its dream, and you can see it changing color in its sleep. It's revealing that maybe it's swimming under a rock and then going behind a reef. And this wonderful insight into a creature is very similar to the types of insights you give away when you use your voice. There's all of this information and humanity that we can often ignore, and I think the wonderment is the same, but we're so used to it that we don't see it. And when we see something like this in a creature that we cannot speak to, there is this incredible marvel. So the project I'd like to show you is Sea Sound, and it looks a little bit like this. Sea Sound is a vocal sculpture tool. It's a collaboration with Rama Allen and The Mill in New York. It allows me to build sculptures in real time. I'm able to create these jewel-like forms and control precious metals, marble, silver, gold at will. And the idea is we're revealing the fingerprint that is the human voice, this unique manifestation that everybody can have. It can be different amongst everyone. So as much as I adore the way that I use this, and I've made hundreds and hundreds of structures now, compositions now, something happened with this piece of work which completely changed the way I saw my relationship with technology. And it didn't have anything to do with me performing. It was a huge moment that involved a very young, very shy girl. She was one of 500 people that came to take part in the installation. And she was like a koala bear on her father's leg, and not willing to talk to anyone else, she waited for her turn in line, and eventually she walked up to this piece and she made a few small sounds. And she saw her voice manifest as this huge form on the wall, and she went from these small utterances of to screaming and laughing and shouting. She opened up, she flowered. That idea that you can, through an augmented relationship, through an interaction with technology, you can see a human fundamental manifest in a brand new way. And that excitement, that interest, leads to a flowering, an opening up of a behavior. And I think that's what's so interesting. There are behaviors and expertise and skills locked within us. And by having these new interactions, in a way, either a feedback loop or a challenge, you can mine all of these new expertise and behaviors outside of ourselves. And I think that's what's so exciting about the relationship with technology. What was so interesting was every single one was so different. All of these different people coming in and interacting, there was a huge amount of variation. And I think it revealed that there is this unique fingerprint that is the human voice. And yes, that's my subjective message, is what I'm particularly interested in. But I think there's an interesting lesson there when it comes to having your own personal narrative and finding ways for people that would never normally interact with that subjective, interact with that personal story, and using technology and experience to augment them with that narrative and leading to a new outcome. They deviate from their expectation, they deviate from their habit, and I just think that's so powerful and so needed right now. So this other piece I want to mention is a voice-based work. It's called Second Self. It was actually part of the opening ceremony here at Impossible Bodies. It's a performance piece that involves the collaboration with Dada Bots and Bell Labs in the anechoic chamber. It involved me collecting about 4 hours of performance data, and I was able to interact with an AI second self in real time. So I use the term second self consistently. The idea is that you can use data and collect information to eventually have a real-time interaction with that data via AI systems. So just like when I was a chess player growing up, I wanted to take those sensibilities and now apply it to the voice. So I actually came from beatboxing, which you don't normally associate with creative direction and tech and sort of fine arts, but the obsession with pushing my voice technically as far as it can go had a similar tone of obsession to my chess when I was growing up. And I managed to become one of the top ranked battlers in the world and continued to tour globally, had over 100 million views for all the performances that have been online. But actually what I'm interested in is how these systems can take a quite niche expertise like the human voice and the way that I performed, and could I actually create an AI system that I could interact with? And the truth was, yes, I was able to work with a second self, a data limb, a pet self. I was able to use sample RNN to train a neural net on my beatboxing that generated a huge amount of patterns and phrasing and sounds that I had never done, but with my voice. And that was such an incredible insight into my expertise. The fact that I could have this chess-like back and forth with this tool. And it made me think about the concept of a data limb and a second self. When will that apply beyond sort of the cutting edge of art and tech? When will all of us and every expertise have the option to have a mirror, an AI that represents a second self that they can interact with and work with? And in doing that, you have these micro evolutions. It's not you, but it's something in between the liminal space of your decisions and a smart system. But because you're creating the data sets, because you're creating the audio, you're actually having full ownership over that interaction. It's not a case of randomization. It's not a case of dominance or automation. It's a beautiful, creative, artistic process that you can create a mirror-like second self that pushes you further. So as I was generating these artificial voices, I didn't want to end there. Obviously, there's myself having this artificial second self, but what happens if a second self of, say, a musician, a vocalist like me, was to interact with the second self of a dancer? So what you see here is a collaboration with Mio Locklear. We created a piece where my artificial voices sung to a artificial dancer, using a neural net and trained off a huge amount of choreography data. What you're seeing here is a artificial dancer not constrained to the normal limitations of human beings being sung to by my AI voice. And this was actually commissioned by United Nations. And it shows how I believe these second self systems will start interacting together, start working together and collaborating. So it's not always about how it pushes us, but I wonder how these systems eventually start working together to become something more. I think you will start to see this more and more in the near future, artists developing tools like this. But when you speak about these ideas, there's almost a science fiction edge to it. And this is the key challenge I think that we all face. It's a challenge of narrative. Science fiction dominates the innovation spaces, and especially when it comes to the minds of the general public. And we have to undo that. We have to find new ways to make these tools seem real. Here we have a future collaborator of mine, DNA Block. I've currently been writing to facial expression, and these real-time puppets are really incredible. To be able to control a digital self, to re-embody oneself, to be able to actually interact with it's your movements, your choices, except it's embodied in something brand new. And I think their work is completely remarkable. And when you talk about digital humanism, when you talk about artificial intelligence in the way that I am, again, science fiction can raise its head, and it gets in the way of people seeing these innovations as real. People think that they can avoid machine learning, not realizing that they're already augmented with their smart devices and it's a part of their life every day. What is getting in the way of progress is narratives of fear. We have a huge question of how can we turn narratives of fear to narratives of ownership. And I truly believe this to be using awe, experience and wonder to open people up to these new ideas. These are currencies of change, and we can use art to pay people in experiences to change their habits, to open themselves to new ideas. And I think it's a very real question. Is artistic expression in itself knowledge? And I'm not sure that it is, but it's an expression that leads to curiosity, and curiosity is the gateway to knowledge. We can use augmented relationships to create opponents, mentors, and collaborators simultaneously. We can use augmented relationships to connect people to new ideas so that they develop expertise and behaviors and skills in ways that were never before available. It is an exciting time to be an artist, and we can take any form that we desire. We can become something more, and we need radical creativity more than ever. I've been Harry Yeff. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you so much, Harry, for this wonderful presentation. So nice to see you live here. We have a few questions for you, of course, after your wonderful presentation. Let me see. Yes, the one that I'm going to take first is, do you regard having multiple second selves, like you manifested, contributes to becoming cyborgs?
Yeah, I guess there's a bit of a debate on the concept of cyborg being physical. So if you achieve new knowledge, is this a physical kind of augmentation? But I believe information to be key in something I call a microevolution. And I believe it sits in the same space as the concept of a cyborg, is this idea that we actually have ownership to make radical jumps in our abilities, radical jumps in what we're capable of doing. And that doesn't just apply to the physical, it doesn't just apply to technology itself. It's the lessons that we can get from technology. It's the lessons we can get from interacting with technology. So this idea that we can jump forward, I think we are in the same space as the intellectual and the cyborg. And this also the term post-human, I think is a really interesting space. And I think it sits under the umbrella of evolution and microevolution. So I don't always use this term, but I think eventually the idea of the physical and the intellectual coming together, I think that's the dream, is we can have physical augmentation with conceptual and intellectual augmentation. This is truly post-human.
Thank you, thank you. I have another one. We are augmented beings, as you say. Don't you see a danger there when it comes to redefining human values? You know, like, don't we forget about human values in the end?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that problem sits with something way more everyday. I think the questions and the issues that come with just using our smart devices, using our mobile phones, I think that's what kind of connects us to. Are we going to put them down? Are we actually going to see and decide that it's a human fundamental to make sure that we are always interacting in person? To see it as unhealthy, to have expect a full spectrum of communication through the digital. Like right now, I'm speaking to all of you through a digital sort of simulation. We're all totally zoomed out and we're forced to kind of interact in a digital way. So based on the situation, what are our values? What is a common value amongst us? And I think once we start to answer that more just with smart devices, I think this is actually a huge issue right now. And that's where that problem sits. And of course, this idea that we can actually augment and change and leave things behind, leave states behind, leave sort of ways of being behind. And there is a huge danger with that. But right now, I think we're a very small fraction of thinkers that are on that very abstract forefront where we're building systems, we're exploring post-humanism, we're exploring this idea that we can augment and change. We're actually smart devices like the social networking platforms that we use and our mobile phones. This is where we have to start questioning, okay, what are our common values? As a human race, do we actually agree on what is healthy and unhealthy with these devices? And I think once we have more answers to that, which I think we will, that will very much guide how these much more experimental systems sit, because it's actually social media and smart devices. This is what's going to create the laws around these tools. This is what's going to create legislation. So it's great to experiment, and this is the beauty of being an artist, is you can experiment how you want and play with these ideas. But the danger right now is very real, it's very here, and it involves something that we use every day. Artists kind of breaking things and experimenting and augmenting. I see this just as a flashlight. We're looking ahead, we're trying things out. And I think that's only healthy, because everyone still has the choice to kind of ignore if they want. If I make a piece of art, they don't have to come and experience it. So it's these much more fundamental tools that we're using. This is where my concern is. This is where the danger is, and that is very much going to set the laws and the tones of how we move forward. So lots of information there. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, thank you. Could you imagine that artists like you and so many other artists that were part of Impossible Bodies, as example, could actually help open up this kind of, in your terms, huge possibilities of what I would call human feedback. You know, not only, of course, human voice, as you so clearly indicate, you know, has this all in it, you know, embraces all these different fields. But could you, you know, that this human feedback is the only thing that we have to counteract this kind of controlling force that is also, you know, like, you know, coming towards us.
Yeah, I think that's our main job. Is to we are here to explore the in-betweens, the modes of connection that are sometimes ignored, the tools which are not always used. As artists, we can come and bring new meaning to all of these things. And when you create a piece of art with a subject or an idea that's sometimes ignored, you raise the general consciousness on that subject. And I think we are absolutely fundamental to kind of reminding the world that there is sometimes more meaning than the traditional platforms, traditional modes. Language is a key one. We are so obsessed with language and what we say, not so much how we say something, the way that we move, the energy, how we smell. Like all of these things contribute to connection and understanding. And when we're stressed, when we're surviving, when we have a job to do, it's very easy to just fall upon systems as they are. But as artists, we can interrupt, we can break open. And it's that process. It's not a radical liberal thing. It's a very practical, useful tool, because if you don't shift your perspective, if you don't try new things, if you don't experience the world in new ways, then sometimes without realizing it, you end up with a tunnel vision. And we're here to make sure that that vision is always expanding. There's always that openness so that people have all the choices and there's no shadows. There's nothing left untouched. So artists can find meaning in most things. And yes, that can be powerful, but artists should be at United Nations. They should be on like world leading platforms because they offer lateral approaches. They offer new ways of exploring these subjects and reminding people of positives and dangers and experiencing information in new ways. So artists 100% need to be in that space and making sure that we experience the world and human feedback in new ways.
By the way, we are making progress in the Netherlands, actually, and there's now a group of artists, quite renowned artists, who group together to be the advisor of what they call the Social Creatieve Raad, so the Social Creative Council of the government, yeah, the central government, which is really fun. It's really just a few months old.
Well, just to say, I do think it's often like overlooked. A lot of these global, like if I attend a global problem-solving event, like maybe that's more politically focused, a lot of people think artists wear a beret and have a paintbrush. They still think that this is what an artist is. And actually, practical problem solving through the arts, making sure that there is empathy and connection, this is something that artists can help with. So if you have world-class expertise across the board, why not have world-class empaths? I think this is so important, and it's a really great thing to fight for, is getting artists in these rooms.
Very good one. I think the last question, let me see. Yes, but a very interesting one. Many people might feel scared and back off when they are asked to collaborate with augmented or artificial intelligence. What would you recommend, you know, to perhaps not to artists, but to a larger group of people to overcome this kind of initial fear?
So I think it's a really important question. And The way that I answer the fear around artificial intelligence is, yes, it is extremely powerful. The scope of it is immeasurable, and that has a certain message that comes with it. And you hear that often, that immeasurable power of artificial intelligence. When you fuse that with science fiction, it gets extremely complicated. You have a sensationalist kind of slant on what actually is human beings creating tools. There is no artificial intelligence. There is no truly artificial, autonomous, self-driving system. These are human beings creating tools. So just like with any power, with any powerful system, these tools can be used how you want. If you do not interact with it, there is no potential for it to help you understand yourself, to push you further, to monitor your expertise, to have a real-time feedback in a brand new way. These are tools for you to use how you want. So maybe don't see it as artificial intelligence. It's a great effect when I do that, artificial intelligence. Yeah, you don't want to see this as just one blanket term. You want to think of it in terms of, well, whose system? Like, what is my contribution? What data am I giving to this? And you can see it more as a very unique mirror. This mirror allows you to see yourself in a brand new way, see humanity in a brand new way. And a really great example is, I know that I spoke a lot about chess in my talk, but AlphaZero is the strongest chess engine on the planet. The same space created Alphago, which is the most complex board game on planet Earth. Many of you are probably familiar with this. They managed to create an artificial intelligence that beat the best player in the hardest board game in all of like human design. Yes. So at first you think, okay, oh my God, this is scary, where actually these systems are now informing and working with the top players, and the game itself is evolving. The human's capacity to experience and play the game is evolving. So AI is actually a flashlight, and it's a flashlight that allows you to see into the future, allows you to see things that you would not normally be able to see. And as a human being, as a real person, you can choose what to bring back with you and use that in a creative and exciting way. The only other point I'm going to make, I know it's a long answer, is there's also a huge danger with not interacting with artificial intelligence. And this applies to a lot of other things. Artists should interact with these technologies, because if you create a piece of work which becomes world-renowned, what it does is it updates the public on the function of these technologies. If you take deepfakes, for example, 4 years ago, it wasn't necessarily a household term, but from artists misusing it, from industries misusing it, for all of these breakings of the process, it became something that everyone's familiar with. And when everyone understood it, then you had Google and IBM creating systems to help monitor deepfakes, to help solve the problems of deepfakes. So by using it as artists, you can actually help inform legislation down the line. You can help guide these technologies so that they're actually designed and made in a human-focused way. Because if it just stays in the tech and the commercial spaces, that's when I think the danger is, not because the technology itself is scary, it's just power that is offset from the general public. So let's make noise, let's make people experience these things, and we can actually have a piece of that technological potential, and then it harmonizes with what we're doing. So go out, use it, play with it, and define your own narratives.
Well, thank you so much. This is this is really wonderful. Actually, I had one more question. Sorry for everybody who thought it was finished. Do you think that when we are able to collaborate with artificial intelligence, although we know it's machine learning and we know it's not on top, but you have these big companies that do kind of, make it also a dangerous thing at the same time. At least it's controlling thing at the same time. But do you think that these technologies could also help us to actually look beyond the first generation, to really kind of, empathize with the planet, you know, that we live on, and with other creatures, you know, and have a better understanding also even among our own species.
Yeah, so I'm okay. I'm going to answer that first with something that applies to me, but I'm not making it about me. It's a way that I can answer your question. You can come at these technologies in two ways, and I think the question that you asked me is an extremely wholesome one. It's about harmony, it's about insight, it's about having a better insight to the world around us. And an example of maybe a turning point for me when it came to working with artificial intelligence was with an AI project, which was with the Mill in New York, where basically it was the beginning of this real-time interaction project where I'm able to make sounds and phrases, and then there's this, it listens to me, and then there's a reply. And what was really interesting was we were using a spectrogram analysis. So as I was creating the audio, it was generating the audio, there was this visual generation. It was able to identify, okay, a kick drum, a hi-hat, all the sounds that I'm making. And after I completed a 10-minute clip, what it did is it categorized all of the variations in every sound that I'd made. So in one 10-minute clip, I did 140 variations of just a kick drum. So no human being could ever tell me that. And you can see that as a cold observation, a mechanical observation, but I saw it as extremely beautiful. And as someone that, yes, for me, it was very interesting, it's my expertise to kind of get that insight into what I'm doing. I saw it as magical. So there's something very powerful there. There was an insight that could never have been achieved by a human being. So I think, of course, when it comes to the natural world, there are many complex systems. The world is, as human beings, because we dominate the planet, we think we understand it. But actually we are so clueless to the actual nuances, and we're so ignorant to our destruction. And I think these systems have the ability, maybe not just to reveal 140 variations of kick drum, but actually maybe what we're destroying and how we can preserve it. They are these magical sort of eyes that allows us to see into information which we cannot achieve on our own. When you start applying concepts like supercomputing, I think things become really interesting, that we will have this ultimate capacity to understand the world around us, and hopefully we can use it to create and not destroy. But when it comes to understanding the world around us, it's an absolute fact that these systems can help us harmonize with the world better. It can give us the expertise and the knowledge and the information to harmonize with the world better. And then it's artists like us that can make sure that those ideas connect with the world. So I'm very positive.
Thank you so much, Harry, for this wonderful evening. It's the best closing event and closing talk, actually, with you that I could imagine. So
thank you so much. Well done for an amazing event. I'm really honored to be alongside like all these artists, and yeah, hello to CJ from Dada Bots as well, for taking part. And yeah, anytime, always be in touch, and we need to stay connected. We have to work together. It's that's the key.
Thank you. And now for all the audience, my last thing. We can meet, and by the way, also for you, Harry, we can meet in the cantina, which is our second live space later on after this is finished. And for everybody who didn't know that yet, the whole Impossible Bodies Expo experience will be you are able to visit that for a much longer period. It will stay online for less than a year, as well as the cantina. So really enjoy and start this evening. Thank you so much, Reeps100. Bye.